Chapter 7 Obligation. Instead of being a long fall, a drop through space, in the nature of a journey as that of Alice going down the rabbit hole, during which there was time to meditate and consider all the possibilities, instead of the titillating sensation of passing rapidly through space, there was hardly time for an instant's thought. It was over before it began. She landed on her heels in the darkness with a jarring impact and fell over backwards on the grass, one arm crushing some of the flowers that grew next to the grass strip. The thud shook her up a bit, and she could feel a slight strain at the back of her neck. Her heels stung too, but they didn't really hurt at all. What hurt more was the fact that she had sat down hard on one of the shoes, which had been tossed over the rail. She stood up cautiously and retrieved the shoe. Rubbing her bottom, she looked around for the mate, but she couldn't find it. It had to be found. Where on earth was it? She went down on her knees and began to feel with her hands. Grass, a leaf, dirt, flowers. There it was, way over there. Why, that was just where she had landed, wasn't it? Funny how hard it was to be sure of things in the dark. She put her shoes on and stood up and looked at the house. Celia's window was only a few feet away. It was dark. Mother always said Celia slept like a log. Mother had better be right. Now there was no time to think of Celia or Mother. What would Mother do if she knew this? She must try not to think of the promise now. Later she would tell them. Later she would explain it all. Now it was Ben who had to be considered. She tiptoed through the garden. When the gravel path crunched under her shoes, she walked on the dirt, tramping down flowers. It didn't matter about them. Adachi could fix them somehow. That's what he was for. This was working out all right. It was the only thing to do. When she had warned Ben about the fire and explained to him what was going to happen, and how he could be the gardener, she would come straight back to the house and tell Mother and Daddy just what she had done and why she had broken her promise. Whatever happened then would just have to happen. Ben would be safe. At least that was a certainty. If they wanted to punish her for that, well, even if they locked her up in a bug house, it would be worth it. She reached the rear hedge and scrambled over it, walking along the edge of the arroyo, past the back of the garage, to the trail that led below. The moonlight made it easy, especially when you knew the way. There's where the trail corkscrewed. There's where the rock was. There's where the gravel was loose. She was almost at the bottom before she remembered that she hadn't made any provisions for getting back into the house. It had been easy enough to get out, but you couldn't jump back up to the balcony. She'd have to ring the bell and rouse Mother and Daddy. Could she do that? Perhaps nobody would hear the bell at night. Of course, she intended to explain it all to Mother and Daddy, Anyway, but not tonight, tomorrow, or the next day. Celia would have to let her in. She would arouse Celia some way, perhaps by throwing gravel on her window, the way that odd boy called Huck Finn always woke up Tom Sawyer when they had adventures at night. Then she'd have to trust Celia not to tell, for tonight at least. Tomorrow she'd tell Mother herself. Here was the chaparral. It was plain to see where the trail went in. Goodness, it was black and scary. Maybe she'd better not. Yes, it had to be done. No backing out now. What would Mary Sunshine think? Just because it was dark, it wasn't any different than it was in the daytime. "Go on," she whispered. "Go on, in there. You want to, don't you?" No, I don't. I'm afraid. It's too dark." "Certainly, I want to. Ben's in there. Wicky's in there. I know where to go." "Only babies are afraid of the dark." "I know where I'm going." "Are you sure?" "Yes, sure, yes." She took 3 steps forward and disappeared into the chaparral. She couldn't see anything. She groped her way along the trail. 1 step and a pause. Another step and a pause. Snow White was afraid too, but there was nothing to be afraid of when the daylight came. Bushes scratched her, but she groped on, putting her right foot forward and bringing her left up to it. Onward at this snail's pace. Right foot, left foot. Was there no end to it? What was that? Something, an animal, no sound. When she tried to move, a bush held her skirt. She had to pull it loose. Right foot, left, right foot, left. Oh, something touched her face. Oh, just a branch. Her heart was racing, the blood through her veins. But she wasn't frightened. No, not very, that is. Right foot, left, right foot, left. Where was the end? Something was wrong. She had been going on like this for hours, and it never led anywhere. It wasn't the right trail, but there was only one trail. What had happened to the arroyo? Here was a place where a little moonlight filtered through. That helped. But right beside her was a big black thing, jumping at her. It was, oh dear, it was only Gosh's house. It wasn't moving at all. It was the shack Gosh lived in, looking black and square in the night. Gosh was asleep inside. She had come this far, and now Ben's house was only a little farther on. Right foot, left, right foot, left. Gosh's house was behind her. The trail was darker than ever. Another branch tore at her skirt. It must have ripped it. Coming back wouldn't be so hard, because Ben would be with her. He'd see her all the way home. He'd probably have some kind of light. It had never occurred to her before what Ben did for a light. Maybe nothing. Right foot, left. I'm coming, Ben, coming. You'll know it soon, Ben. The complete darkness gave way to the silver glow. She had worked her way out to the sandy area, and a few yards across the soft sand stood the dark mass of Ben's house. Virginia moved quickly across the small clearing to the door of the house. It was closed. From the interior came the noise of Ben breathing, not snoring, but almost snoring, the regular machine-like exhalations that old people make when they sleep. "Ben," she whispered. The breathing continued. She tapped gently on the door, so gently she could barely hear the taps herself. The breathing continued. "Ben," she said softly. What if she couldn't wake him? Why didn't he answer? "Ben," she said in a normal tone of voice. Alone in the moonlight, surrounded by the scrub oak, her voice sounded awfully loud, frighteningly loud. Maybe that wasn't Ben in there. Maybe Ben had gone away, and that was somebody else in there. It was a dreadful thought. She didn't know whether to call again or not. If only she were back in her room, safe in bed. Was this all real? Was it a dream after all? And she'd wake up in a minute, and it would all be over. It was always such a relief when you woke up and realized that something unpleasant was only a dream. But she wasn't going to wake up safe in her own bed. She was really standing down in the arroyo bottom, in the moonlight, while Mother and Daddy thought she was asleep in her room. Standing down here, with hardly enough clothes on, tapping and saying "Ben," while Ben slept on, and the whole plan seemed to be failing, to be falling to pieces. "Ben," she called, desperately, and at the same time she gave the door a push. It opened a few inches. "Ben, please wake up," she said into the doorway, holding her breath and waiting for an answer. She was near the end of her resources. If he didn't answer, she wouldn't know what else to do. She wanted to cry, and she knew that she mustn't cry. "Dear Ben, please understand." She stood frozen, and the rhythmical breathing inside the shack stopped. Somebody choked and said, "Hey." There was a rustling movement, and then a voice, unmistakably Ben's voice. Really his, really Ben's, said, "Who's there? What do you want?" Virginia half laughed and half cried. "It's me, Ben. It's Virginia." "What? Who's there?" "Virginia." Well, I'll be switched. "I had to come, Ben, because—" "Maybe I'm going crazy," said Ben, still in the darkness of the shack. "Is that really Virginia?" "Yes." Virginia caught her breath and began to cry. "Ben, they're going to burn you and Wiki with gasoline torches. And I had to tell you. And I—" She became incoherent through choked sobs. Ben opened the door of the shack. Well, my goodness me," he said. "If this ain't a surprise for fair. Now, you mustn't take on so." He was still amazed at his sudden awakening and the appearance of Virginia. He glanced at the moon and decided it must be past midnight. Of just what this nocturnal visit was all about, he had no idea. Gasoline torches, had she said. Well, whatever it was, here was Virginia sure enough, and she was crying as if she were heartbroken, and talking words through her tears that didn't make any sense at all. Something had happened to upset her, and she wasn't the kind of little girl who got upset over just nothing. He put a hand on her shoulder, and he could feel her trembling. There, he said. There, 'tain't nothin' so bad as all that." "Yes, it is," she sobbed. "It's awful, Ben, it's so awful." Now, Ben squatted down beside her and took her in his arms. She buried her face in the ragged shoulder of the coat he had just thrown on. She clung to him, crying, making no attempt to explain anything more, simply surrendering to her pent-up emotion in the sanctuary of his arms. There, said Ben softly. It's all right now. Everything's going to be all right now. He held her close with one arm around her waist, and with the other hand he stroked her hair. He touched one of her bare arms, and he could feel that she was cold. "Why, you're shiverin'," said Ben. "It's too cold for you to come out at night without a coat on." She said something, but the words were lost in a sob in the ragged coat's shoulder. Sure, said Ben. "You just keep on cryin' till you feel like stoppin', and then we'll fix it all up. Why, Wicky'll be wonderin' what we're up to actin' up out here like this." His squatted position on his haunches was getting uncomfortable. She was saying something about a garden. "I reckon you're beginnin' to get cried out some now. Pretty soon the tears won't run no more. Won't that be funny?" He patted her arm and stroked her shoulders, but she made no move to relinquish him. "I think we'll move inside," he said. "This here's November, and it's right chill of nights." He led her into the shack. "Be a little warmer in here, and we'll fix a little light, and then we'll feel a whole lot better. Yes, indeedy, a whole lot better." He struck a match and lit a candle. He had no other illumination. The shack had only one or two fragments of furniture, a wobbly table, a handmade stool, and in one corner the wire cage containing Wicky. The candle was propped in its own wax on a cracked dish. Ben set the dish in the middle of the table, and the orange-yellow flame rose and wavered and slowly burned brighter. On the floor along one wall was an old mattress which Ben had restuffed, and on the mattress were several worn blankets. One of them had a large hole burnt in its middle. "You just set down there on the bed," said Ben. The candle afforded a fluttering light, and shadows moved within the shack as the flame sputtered. "Here, I reckon this here blanket would be put to better use if it was throwed over your shoulders. How's that?" Virginia nodded and sniffled. "Oh, Ben, I love you so much." She sat down on the mattress and clasped her arms around her knees. "That's all right," said Ben. He sat down beside her. "I reckon it's my fault." "Your fault?" "Yes, indeedy. I didn't understand about little girls. I didn't think twice like I should have thought before you and I come to be such good friends." She moved closer to him, and he patted her. "If I had of thought twice, you wouldn't be in this fix now." "What fix, Ben?" "Why, bein' down here all scared and frozen at this hour, like you are now. That's all my fault, Virginia. You ain't to blame." "Oh, but Ben, you don't understand." No, understand about why I had to come here tonight, I mean." "What is there that riled you up so?" "They're going to burn it all, Ben, with gasoline torches, and you and Wicky would be burned if I didn't tell you. Fletcher and Mother and Daddy. Do you know who Fletcher is?" I don't, and because of a little girl named Joanne Stevens. In the morning, the first thing it will be is a blazing inferno, and Wiki would be burnt if you weren't here. Wouldn't he? So I came down, and it was Mary Sunshine who did it. I haven't got any clothes on except this skirt and blouse, like Mary Sunshine. And, oh Ben, can you garden? Well, said Ben, now let's see just what is troublin' us most. Who is goin' to burn things up with gasoline torches? They are. They? Policemen. Sure enough, said Ben. Well now, let's see what else we want to know. I jumped off the balcony, said Virginia. Yes, indeedy. They gave me a bracelet for not coming down any more, so that's why I didn't, because of my promise. I mean, do you see, Ben? Oh, yes, indeedy. Oh, I knew you'd understand, Ben. I think you're so wonderful. Well, said Ben, now we got to figure out about gettin' you back home. Wouldn't do for you to stay here all night with me. No, no indeedy. Will you go up with me? Oh, yes indeedy. I'm just a-figurin' whether I ought to go and arouse your daddy, and maybe try to explain this whole thing. Tonight. Well, that's the trouble. I could do it, maybe, in the daytime, but in the middle of the night, like this, it might not work out so well. And you could ask him to give you a Dashi's job, Ben. I bet he would, Ben, if he only understood how it was. We'll see, we'll see. You just let me think for a minute, Virginia. Yes, Ben. I got to get out of here anyway if they're a-goin' to burn it, said Ben, thinkin' aloud. But that part's all right, because there's no stayin' here with Dean no matter what. Main trouble is gettin' Virginia back without raisin' a fuss, and maybe havin' her parents misunderstand how it is and all. I do declare it is kind of a spot to try to figure out sudden like. Wasn't it right for me to come tell you, Ben? Ben put an arm around her and held her close to him. Whatever you done is all right, he said. You were the best little girl that ever drawed a breath. Better than Mary Sunshine. Better than Mary Sunshine, declared Ben. Your parents know a whole lot more about you than I do, but what I know goes down a lot deeper and is the real thing. I reckon I know what you're gonna be like all your life. I know what you're made of, Virginia, and nobody can ever unmake that. It's finer than fine gold. That's the Bible, Ben. Yes, and I thought once it was a mistake for you to be growin' up without it. But I was wrong. Don't go studyin' it lessen you want to. Don't never do anything, Virginia, that don't fit right into what you know best. 'Cause you got somethin' better'n all the book learnin' and brain thinkin' in the world. You got more'n just good sense. You got pure sense. That's rare in humans. I know I ain't got it, but you have. Maybe Mary Sunshine had it. I ain't sure. Pure sense is the thing that makes you do the absolute right thing, no matter how hard it is for you to do it, or how bad or awful or mistaken it seems, like at the time, to everybody else in the world. It's something that comes right from the core of you, or the soul of you, or the guts of you, or whatever word there is to pin it down with. The place where you're alone, said Virginia. That's it, said Ben. When you're a growed lady, you remember Ben once in a week of Sundays, because he really begun to understand you, and he really loved you. But if Ben slips your mind a long time from now, that don't matter. Important thing is for you to keep that place where you're alone. It's pure. It won't never fail you. It can't, because it's all the you there is. Ben, you sound as if I'd never see you again. Can't tell now what might happen. We can't go on settin' here until they find us. That wouldn't do. We got to start something soon, and whatever we do, it ain't gonna be easy. Your pure sense carries you right through anything, and it always will. But my good sense is plain scared right now. Listen. Thought I heard something. They sat in silence for 1 second, and then the door was abruptly kicked in. They stared up at the figure looming in the doorway. For an instant it was hard to see who it was. Ben didn't move, and Virginia didn't move, and the figure stood there taking in the scene. It's begun, Ben said. Virginia recognized Dean. For a moment he stared in surprise. The candle sputtered and nearly went out. Dean stepped into the shack and shoved the door closed behind him. He crossed his arms and glared down at Ben and Virginia. Slowly the glare changed to a sneer. Ben's heavy breathing was the only sound in the shack. When Virginia dropped from the balcony to the garden, the house was not asleep as she had supposed. Both Mother and Daddy were still up, and were in the library listening to a midnight news broadcast. Earlier in the evening, a crowd of citizens had formed in front of the Inglewood jail and demanded the prisoner who had been arrested for the Joe Ann Stevens murder. At 10 o'clock, there had been fear of violence as the mob pounded on the door, but the midnight news reporter stated that the crowd had slowly and sullenly dispersed when the sheriff convinced them that the prisoner had been spirited into the county jail some miles away in Los Angeles. The case was in the hands of the law, and mob violence had been avoided. At 12:15, Daddy turned the radio off, and Mother went upstairs. She went to her room and turned on the lights. Before undressing, she walked quietly down the hall to Virginia's room. She was reasonably certain that Virginia hadn't really been ill at dinner. Nevertheless, she stepped into the room in the darkness and approached the bed. Before she reached it, she knew that something was wrong. She knew that nobody was in the room. An instant later, she had the light on. One glance told everything. The bed empty. The nightgown tossed over the foot of it. The missing shoes. The missing clothes. The open door onto the balcony. Kidnapped. She screamed once. In the shack, Dean broke the silence. She only comes down here to bring you food, he said. It don't matter what you think, said Ben. It ain't so. Get up, Dean said. Ben got to his feet. Virginia stood beside him. If I didn't see it, I couldn't believe it, Dean said. He looked at Virginia, an undeveloped kid My God! And to Ben he said, "You know what goin' on in Inglewood tonight?" "No," said Ben. "There's a lynching party breaking into the jail. There'll be one here before morning." "You don't understand," said Ben. "Virginia never been here before at night. She found out they was gonna burn us out, and she come down to warn us. I ain't hurt her. Nobody has. And you ain't goin' to touch her now." "Me? I guess you are crazy," said Dean. "How long she been here?" "Not long," said Ben. "Get her home," said Dean. "Get her home for Christ's sake. Don't stand there." He turned to the door. "Wait a minute." He opened the door and looked out into the darkness. "Ruddy, what's going on?" said Rudabah's voice. "Get a load of this," said Dean. Rudabaugh came to the door of the shack and looked in. "Holy jumping God!" he exclaimed. "Just a neckin' party," said Dean. "Claims he ain't touched her." "We better lam out right now," Rudabaugh said. "Nothing worse than this." "Wait a minute," said Dean. "I got an idea." And to Ben and Virginia he said, "You lovebirds just stay put for a minute." He turned back to Rudabaugh. "Maybe we can use it." "How?" "Not sure yet," said Dean. "Let's do some fast thinkin'." "Too hot to monkey with," said Rudabaugh. "Not if we're on the right side," said Dean. "Hurry it up," said Rudabaugh. "The kid's old man is a tycoon, don't forget." "Makes it worse," said Rudabaugh. "No," said Dean. "How's this? We're comin' home late at night. See the light in the shack. Think it's funny. We come over to have a look-see. Get here just in time to stop the old guy from giving her the works. What's it get us?" "Why," said Dean, "we saved the tycoon's daughter from another Inglewood case. If it wasn't for us, why, don't you get it? Reward, see? Risky. Everything's risky. Want to try it. Can't backfire, can it? No, there's two of us. Don't matter what he says. Or the kid. What's the kid know? It's a natural. We'd be dumb to throw it away." "What do we do first?" asked Rudabaugh. "If the old guy had some scratches on his face," began Dean. "Where the kid scratched him," agreed Rudabaugh. "And the kid's clothes is torn off, or half torn off, because we got here just in time," said Dean. "How can it miss?" "But what's the kid gonna say later?" "The word of a 10-year-old kid and a crazy old man against our word. And get this, we'll call the cops, and for further evidence. Who has the kid been comin' down here to see all the time? Us or him? It's foolproof." Rudabaugh nodded. "Let's chance it." They looked at Ben and Virginia. He had retreated to the rear of the shack, and he had Virginia partially in back of him. "You ain't gonna do it," he said. "You ain't gonna hurt her." Dean walked toward him, and Rudabaugh closed the door of the shack. The demotion of Tex, which took place with Rudabaugh's arrival in the arroyo, meant that he could no longer live in the shack he had once shared with Heavy and later with Dean. Tex abandoned the place to Dean and Rudabaugh and moved down and joined Gosh. Whether Gosh liked it or not was of no consequence. He was not consulted. Tex was not sure that he himself would stay in the arroyo much longer. He considered moving further south, possibly to San Diego and the Mexican border. There was one means of picking up a little quick cash in a border town that had worked before and could be worked again. It was easy and it was fast. You simply walked across the line to the Mexican side of a town like Tijuana or Mexicali, and you lay in wait for an American. The street lights were bad and the alleys were dark. If you found a drunk, it was a cinch to roll him. If you didn't, you could stick up any fellow who happened to come along alone. If he got tough, you might have to knock him out. Once he had done that in Agua Prieta, then you frisk his pockets and walk back across the line to the American side. Even if the fellow sees you later on and recognizes you, he can't do a damned thing about it. Why? Because it happened in Mexico, and this here's the United States side. Only chance the fellow had would be to find you again on the Mexican side, and you don't go back for a couple of days. And if he reports it to the Mexican police, what the hell do they care about it? If Americans come across the line, they deserve to be robbed. Or maybe he could find Heavy again and pal along with him. He didn't know which way Heavy had gone. North, maybe to Frisco. Heavy had said there was only one way to handle Dean, and that was the same way as you would handle a rattlesnake. Heavy might still be sore. He was right, though, damned right, if he could only get Dean just once before scramming out. Him and that Rudy both. Then he'd hit the road for San Diego, and maybe go thumbing it back to Texas, following the border route. He thought about it and put it off for a day or two. He was ready to go, and he wanted to go. But again, he postponed it for a day. Tex lay in the dark beside Gosh. He dreamt that Dean was fleeing in panic, and he was pursuing him. They came to the edge of the arroyo, but the cliff was sheer, and the trail had been removed. Dean got down on his knees and begged Tex not to hurt him. Tex measured the distance and then kicked Dean in the face, and Dean went over backwards and over the cliff, screaming like hell as he went. Tex turned and started for Tijuana, and the yelling continued. He awoke with a start. It had all been a goddamn dream, too bad, but the yelling was real, because there it came again. What the hell was it? He crawled to his feet, and Gosh woke up. Jesus, hear that? Asked Tex. What happened? Said Gosh. Sounds like Ben must have went crazy. I'm gonna go see. He stumbled out of the shack. Above, on the trail from the lot, were lights, flashlights, playing over the switchback as the three figures hurried down the trail. Through the chaparral to the west, the headlights of an automobile flashed, and a red spotlight played over the scrub oak. Somewhere up above, a siren began to whine, coming closer rapidly. What the hell, thought Tex. Am I nuts? To the north, on the top of the Devil's Gate Dam, an automobile stopped, and a spotlight was turned and played below onto the chaparral. What in the name of Christ? Muttered Tex. Cars on the golf course. Cars on the dam. Fellows coming down the trail. Police cars. Cops. He groped along the trail toward Ben's shack. Jeepers creepers. Radio Patrol Officers Conn and Redburn met Edward Stewart, where the private road turned in from Arroyo Drive. They abandoned the car and hurried across the lot to the arroyo edge. After a moment, the three of them found the trail and started down. As they descended, they could see the white headlights and the red spotlight of a sheriff's car across the arroyo near El Encanto Country Club. Officer Gibbs and Detective Lieutenant Ryland took the dirt road across the golf course, speeding the sheriff's car toward the 6th green. Radio patrol officers Thomason and Murdoch, following broadcast orders, stopped their car on the top of the Devil's Gate Dam and turned the spotlight below on the chaparral. All the lights of the Stewart house, inside and out, were on. Margaret Stewart rushed out to the garden and peered below, while Celia paced back and forth in the house, not knowing whether to pray to Jesus or Ammi Semple McPherson or Saint Germain. The siren of the police ambulance whined through the empty residential streets, and the driver turned the car onto Palm Drive and raced it toward Arroyo Drive. Officers Kahn and Redburn, followed by Edward Stewart, plunged into the chaparral, following the trail by flashlight, and came upon Gosh's shack, with Gosh trembling in the doorway. "Where'd they go?" Kahn demanded. "That way," pointed Gosh. They hurried on, and Redburn dragged Gosh along with them. Virginia had never known terror. The complete soul-racking experience of seeing the world go mad before your eyes was unknown. Fear, yes. She had been afraid in the past. She had been afraid tonight. She had been afraid when Dean kicked open the door, and she had been afraid when he and the strange one called Rudy talked together and then advanced into the shack. But that fear was a mild breeze compared to the tornado of panic and horror that immediately broke loose. They wanted to kill Ben, for some inexplicable, unaccountable reason. Dean was suddenly hurting Ben, and the other one was reaching for her. She screamed when Dean hit Ben in the face, and as she caught her breath to scream, again she could hear the sickening impact of Dean's knuckles on flesh. Ben collapsed, and his weight shook the flimsy little shack like an earthquake. As Ben went down, the other one was trying to tear her clothes. The crash of Ben's weight upset the candle. It rolled off the table and landed on the floor, and the shack was in darkness. "Don't let her yell," Dean was saying. A hand seized her by the back of the neck, and fingers clamped over her mouth. Her mouth had been open to scream again, and when she couldn't scream, she bit down as hard as she could on the fingers. The hands gripping her let go, and a voice said, "Jesus." "Wait till I make a light," said Dean's voice. "It ain't gonna work," said Rudabaugh. "Damn near bit my hand off. Let's drop it and scram." "Not now," said Dean. He struck a match and held it high. Virginia was crouched in terror on the mattress. The flickering light showed Ben lying on his side on the floor. The left side of his face was bloody, and his eyes were open and staring. "Ben, Ben," shrieked Virginia, trying to crawl to him. "It won't work," said Rudabaugh. "It's too crazy." "Listen," said Dean. They heard the siren of the police ambulance. We got a chance, insisted Dean. It's us two against them. Go out and meet the cops halfway. Rudabaugh yanked open the door and saw a figure approaching. Hey, officers, give us a hand here, he said, and then he saw that the figure was Tex. What the hell's going on? Asked Tex, peering into the house. In the flickering light of the burning match, he had a glimpse of Ben and Dean and Virginia. Great God, who done what? Shut him up, commanded Dean. The match began to burn his fingers, and he whipped it out. Listen here, you, said Rudabaugh. Dean came out of the shack and saw the spotlights trained on the chaparral. Tex, he said, thrusting Rudabaugh aside. The old guy tried to kill the girl. D'ya understand? He grabbed Tex by a shoulder. D'ya understand? You guys let go o' me, yelled Tex. In the darkness, Virginia groped toward Ben. She felt his coat, and she grasped as one of her hands touched warm, sticky blood. She was sure he was dead. Dean had murdered him. Murdered him. She wasn't screaming, but sobbing violently, quivering in panic and hysteria. Time had stopped. The world had gone forever. There was nothing anywhere but terror. Nothing made sense anymore. Things just happened without reason, like the flashlights and the voices and the vague figure of a policeman looking in at her, and Daddy right in the middle of all this, Daddy shoving the policeman aside and rushing into the shack and grabbing her. They hit him, Virginia shrieked. Daddy, Daddy, he's all blood. He's all blood, Daddy. Daddy lifted her and held her and tried to calm her, and outside she could hear Dean saying, We saved her, officer. The old guy tried to tear her clothes off and... That's a damn lie, said Tex. I broke my promise. I broke my promise, sobbed Virginia. On the floor, Ben groaned. He's not dead, Daddy. He moved. Daddy didn't say anything. He had his arms around her, and he held her so tight that it hurt. Then he pulled her toward the door. More policemen and more flashlights. Somebody was helping Ben off the floor. He could hardly stand. She stared back at Ben as the policeman held him, and Daddy led her out of the shack. Flashlight, uniforms, a revolver. Don't anybody move, said a voice. A flashlight beam showed Gosh lying on the sand. Then the beam fell on Dean. He hit Ben, Virginia screamed. The kid's off her nut, said Dean. You're all under arrest, said a policeman. How bad's she hurt? Asked another. More lights. A policeman with a shotgun. A siren coming nearer. A man who wasn't a policeman who said quietly, I'll take charge here, and played a flashlight from one to another in turn, and asked, This the father? I'm Edward Stewart. Detective Lieutenant Ryland, said the man. How's the child? Hysterical, said Daddy. I don't know what. Who hit this man? Asked Ryland, pointing to Ben. I did, officer, said Dean, to keep him from. It's a lie, said Tex. I seen 'em. In the darkness, on the far side of the clearing, Gosh crawled into the chaparral. Gibbs, Conn, and Redburn, said Ryland. Place everybody under arrest. Thomason, get here. Up on the dam, said Conn. Control told him to stand by, I guess. The whine of the ambulance sounded near. It had circled around to the golf club and cut across the dirt road to the 6th green. "There's Barton," said Ryland. "Go show him the trail, Gibbs. Bring the stretcher." Ben," sobbed Virginia. "Who's Ben?" asked Ryland. "Me, sir." "Did you steal this child?" "No, sir." "Yes, he did," said Dean. "We saw him," said Rudabaugh. "They're liars," said Tex, spitting blood. "The child ain't hurt, Mr. Stewart," said Ben. "Did this man touch you, Virginia?" asked Daddy. "He did," said Virginia, pointing at Rudabaugh. "Oh, Christ," said Rudabaugh. "It was his idea." He pointed at Dean. "The old guy attacked the child," said Dean. "It's a damn lie," yelled Tex. "He done it himself. I seen him." "How do you like that, Dean?" All right, everybody shut up," said Ryland. "Con and Redburn, you take these 2 men." He indicated Rudabaugh and Dean. "Gibbs and I will take these." He touched Ben and pointed to Tex. "You'll want to go along in the ambulance with the child, Mr. Stewart." "Ambulance? Isn't necessary to. Examination. Too many stories. Where the hell's Barton?" "He's here," said a policeman, leading the ambulance attendant up to the knot of men. "Don't let them hurt Ben," sobbed Virginia. "Daddy, don't let them hurt Ben." "Can she walk?" asked Barton. "Put her on the stretcher," said Ryland. "What the hell did you come for? Gibbs'll help you. Con, call in and tell Control to release Thomason." The man called Barton tried to take Virginia away from Daddy, and in the moving and crisscrossing flashlight beams, Virginia searched for Ben. Then she saw him. A policeman had him. "Ben, where's Wiki?" She called, but Daddy passed between them, and she lost Ben in the darkness. Then she knew that she wasn't going to see Ben again. Not tonight, not tomorrow, never, never again. "Ben! Daddy!" she screamed. She fought against the man called Barton. She tried to break away from Daddy. "He can be the gardener. He can be the gardener," she tried to explain. Hysterical, a voice said. "Lay her on the stretcher," somebody said. "Easy there." "Ben didn't get Wiki," she screamed. "Wiki's still there. They'll burn him. They'll burn him." She was being lifted and held, and carried and held, hands, strangers, voices, lights, while she talked all the time and tried to explain, and nobody listened, and she cried and sobbed and begged them to listen, and all the time they kept going somewhere, moving on in the darkness of a world made up entirely of night and flashlights and uniforms, and a face here and a face there, round faces, big faces, little faces, strange faces, bumping along in a bed on wheels, and a siren whining somewhere ahead, or was it behind? But you never caught up with it, so maybe it wasn't real. Phantasmagoria of a reeling world, of men in white and a sick pungent smell and steel instruments, and somebody rubbing her arm with cotton, and time passing by. Tick-clunk. The hand jumped a minute went by, and forever went by, and forever was laughing because it wasn't real. It wasn't real. It didn't make any material difference. Forever and forever and forever. Phooey phooey and kafooey. Happy birthday, Clarensley. Happy birthday to you." She was vomiting into a white bowl held by a white nurse in a white room, in a white world. It was the Annecy cookies. She shouldn't have eaten the 10th one, but should have saved it for Ben and Wiki. Ben and Wiki. Oh dear God, Ben and Wiki. Dear God, save Ben and Wiki. But God's not an old man with white whiskers. He's not. No, he's not even got a white robe. That's just the way little boys and girls think about God. That's the way Mother looked. That was Mother's face looking down at her. Mother breathing on her. Mother's face next to hers, and Daddy's too. Then a white nurse. Mother, Daddy, nurse. Is there a God in me? Now you're catching on. You can't get away from God because there ain't nothing nowhere but God. I'm the same way. Tell me some more. So there ain't nothing real except that place where you're alone. That's all there is. Bushes and trees and black widow spiders. They ain't. But you're real, Ben. Only in that place where you're alone. That's all there is. None of the rest. None of the rest. That's why Forever laughed. Time and Forever knew it wasn't real. Then it can't hurt. If it's not real, it can't hurt. Oh, of course, it's real in a way. Don't be silly. But not really real, because there is something more than just all that out there. That can't hurt you, not now. Now you're catching on. Look at me, Ben's eye. Ben's eyes, God and I won't take it into my head to jump off that there Colorado Street Bridge the way a lot of folks has done. Neither will I. Why? Let's say it together. All that is real is the place where you're alone. That's all there is. Didn't she wear anything? Not even one single stitch. Pure sense is the thing that makes you do the absolute right thing. Comes right from the core, guts, soul, whatever word there is. The place where you're alone. That's it. Not a single stitch. Not a single stitch. Why should she? Chapter 8. A Law of Probability. From the county jail, you walk out of the Civic Center of Los Angeles, northward on Broadway. When you come to the Los Angeles River, you go down beneath the overpass, and you follow the Santa Fe Railroad tracks and the Union Pacific Railroad tracks past Sycamore Grove. You are really in the arroyo then, and all you have to do is to keep staying with it, and you don't pay no attention to streets or railroads after that. You stay in the bottom and keep passing under bridges and streets and culverts and such, while the bottom twists and turns for some miles. Then ahead you see the abutments of the Colorado Street Bridge. You walk under it like you did the first time you come into the arroyo, and then, just like that first time, you come to the Rose Bowl. You slow up a little because you wonder how it's going to look up yonder, and pretty soon you know. You stand still and look around. The golf course is the same, and the sides of the arroyo is the same. And so are the houses where the rich folks live. Up ahead, the Devil's Gate Dam is still there, forming a barricade across the arroyo 3 or 4 blocks further north. But where the chaparral was, that's all different. There ain't no chaparral no more, not even a twig. There's a broad, flat, empty, burnt-off place. It's covered with black sooty ashes and charred roots, and as you walk over it, a gray-black dust rises behind you. It's a naked, dead place without even a weed or a blade of grass living in it. Once in a while, there's a battered can or a piece of broken glass. You can walk on to the middle of it and look all around, and with one good look, you can see the whole place where the chaparral used to be. Up near the base of the dam, a motor chugged. A man was running a tractor over the burnt area, backing and starting, ripping, pulling, and plowing up the burnt ash. The ash has had 30 days to cool off, and the dust is getting fine. Once an eddy of wind scooted across the charred surface and sucked a whirling spiral of gray dust along with it. It blew out over the golf course, and the dust disappeared. Over on the 7th tee, a man was sitting. He wasn't a golfer. You could tell that at once. He had been watching Ben for some time. It looked like Ben wasn't sure, and he walked slowly across the back ash toward the tee. Why, yes, it was Gosh. He was sitting on the grass, and he looked at Ben with interest. "Well," said Ben. Gosh opened his mouth to speak. "Surprise," said Ben, squatting down beside Gosh. "Yes," said Gosh. "Changed it a lot, didn't they?" said Ben. "Yeah. Where you stay?" "Over there," said Gosh, nodding toward the distant clubhouse. "Good place?" "Gosh, no. But I ain't gonna leave." "Sure," said Ben. "What you got?" "Only room for one." "Yes," said Ben. "Ain't like it was," explained Gosh. "No room for nobody else." "Only room for one," said Ben. "Yes," said Gosh. Then he asked timidly, "Been in jail?" "Vagrancy," said Ben. "How?" 30 days, said Ben. "We all got just the same." "Where was you?" "That night." "Uh-huh. Oh, around. They feed you good." "Pretty good," admitted Ben. "Where was you?" "I stayed in the bushes," said Gosh. "They all went away. I stayed all night. They didn't come back." "When they do the burnin'?" "Next day. Want to see where your place was?" "Well, maybe," said Ben. "I can show ya. Maybe. I like to show ya." Gosh stood up and walked from the tee across the burnt area. Ben followed. "It was here." "Yeah," nodded Ben. "This is it." He scuffed his heel in the debris. A few feet away was the remains of the wire cage. "You know what happened to him?" Ben asked. "No." "Well," said Ben, staring down at the cage. "Fella came through and looked in all the houses before they set fire to it," said Gosh. "Had a axe and kinda took a lick or two at 'em, so I left. Fella looked careful in the houses." "Well," said Gosh, considering. "He looked. Then they set fire. It took a whole day to burn. Ben stooped over and picked up the cage. It was crushed out of shape, and one wall was missing. He dropped it. Maybe he got away, he said. No, said Gosh miserably. No chance. I think maybe he got away, said Ben, nodding. No, got burnt, said Gosh. You sure, for a fact? No, well, I think he got away. Couldn't, said Gosh, all burnt up. You coulda come and got him, said Ben. I coulda, said Gosh, beginning to whimper, but I didn't think of it. Sure, said Ben. He scuffed his shoe in the debris of ashes, a few pieces of twisted metal, some broken glass. You won't find nothin', said Gosh. I already looked. Well, said Ben, it's a law of probability. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. Poor little fella, said Gosh. Just a law of probability, said Ben. A what? 50-50, said Ben. Guessin' yes. Ben kicked aside more ashes. He had exposed part of a small oblong metal box. He scooped ashes aside and pulled the box free. Once it had been covered with black suede. Gosh was interested. Ben tried to raise the lid. The hinge at the back had been melted down. With considerable effort, Ben managed to break the lid loose. Inside were the remains of a shaving set. Gosh, said Gosh. Ruined, said Ben. No good. Maybe I ought to return it just the same. Was a pretty fancy one once, said Gosh. Yours? Nope. Ben closed the lid. Well, guess I'll be moseying. I'm stayin', declared Gosh. What for? I can still find golf balls off in the course. Sell 'em. I got 2 dimes right now. He plunged a hand in a pocket and brought out the coins. They lay in the palm of his hand and shone in the sunlight. He considered Ben for a moment and said, If you want to stay, there's a way of getting under the golf house. Nobody round at night much. I stay there every night. Can't stand up, but you can lie down. Guess not, said Ben. Gosh was disappointed. Now that there was no danger of Ben's wanting to take possession of his refuge, he felt more fraternal. You could stay a night or two, see how you like it, he urged. Nope. They got garbage cans there. Sometimes there's stuff in 'em that ain't never been used. Good stuff. Only you got to do it in the dark when everybody's gone. Goin' inland, said Ben. He gave the wreck of the cage a gentle push with his foot. December's cold on the coast. Damp cold. Where at? Arizona, around Phoenix. Warmer there. Well, all right, said Gosh, giving up. If you want to. I ain't leavin'. I ain't gonna leave at all. He took a step back and crossed his arms in a gesture of finality. Ben looked up toward the arroyo top. He could see the hedge and the rear of the garage, but not the house. He started to walk across the burnt area, toward the trail, to the top, carrying the charred box under his arm. Goin' now? Asked Gosh. Guess so, said Ben. Luck. So long, said Gosh. He stood still and watched Ben cross the black ground. He continued to stand, staring in the sunlight, as Ben ascended the trail. To the north, the tractor chugged and panted and rasped. It cut back and forth across the ash-strewn ground, raising a cloud of gray-black dust in its wake. Each lateral journey brought it a few feet nearer. When Ben reached the arroyo top, Gosh waited to see if he would look back. He didn't. Gosh turned and walked back to the 7th tee and sat down on the grass. Ben contemplated the Stewart house. What day was this? Wednesday. She'd be in school at this hour. Might not be anybody home. Might be a good thing to pass right by. Still, here was this box. It wasn't any good. But still, that didn't have anything to do with it. Whether it was still any good or not, it could be left, and maybe a word or two, just something to go by, just to hear something. Yes, indeedy. He crossed the lot to Arroyo Drive, and entered the private road, and walked to the back door. He hesitated for a second, and then knocked. Everything was quiet inside. He looked around. There was her playhouse, and the grass, and beyond the grass, the flower garden. They would have some poinsettias by Christmas, right nice ones. Up above, off the 2nd story, was that balcony. Why, she might have hurt herself bad by jumping off of that in the dark. Footsteps in the kitchen. Somebody was coming. Now he noticed a push button beside the door. He could have rung. Hadn't seen it before, so here was somebody. Through the screen door, in the shadow of the screen porch, he saw Celia. "Howdy do," he said formally. "Don't want nothin'," said Celia. I knocked before I saw that there button," he said. "You sellin' something?" asked Celia. "No, ma'am, I just—" "Oh, my goodness," said Celia seriously. "Are you that one?" "I'm Ben." "What you want now? She ain't here. You better go 'way before I call somebody." "'Tain't nothin' to get excited about," said Ben. "I'm a-goin' right along. I just wanted to ask. If they catch you hangin' round here again, they'll send you to jail for life. Said so." "I won't stay," said Ben. "I won't be comin' again. But I'd just like to ask a friendly word about Miss Genya." "Yes, ma'am," he said gratefully. "If Miss Stewart knew I was talkin' to you, she'd take my head off. You could say I was somebody else, and while you're sendin' me away, you just say that, what?" "I'll tell you," said Celia. "They went and took her, screamin' and hysterical, to the hospital, right in the middle of the night. I stayed here all alone, and Miss Stewart, she went, and Mr. Stewart, he'd already went in the ambulance with her. They said there was blood on her, and her clothes was in shreds, and all those men down there tellin' like they had took turns usin' her till you couldn't make out who done it, or how many it, and when they got her to that hospital, with doctors and nurses examinin' her, they says there ain't a scratch on this child. She ain't been touched by nobody." "Yes, indeedy, I know that, but—" "Jest a miracle, that's all," continued Celia. "Ascended masters seen the light and the truth, and they lifted that child right up into their care and protected her from evil. I told Miss Stewart how I seen it, and even she's got to admit that it was just a miracle." "Yes, indeedy, but—" "So they kept her there in that hospital 3 days, to get her quieted down. because just nerves is all that's ailin' her, and then they brung her home here and put her in her own bed, and she could smell how they had burnt out the arroyo bottom, and she liked to have had the hysterics all over again, and the grievin' she suffered. Why, it was like she'd lost a relative, cryin' and sick, and for a while they even thought they might have to get you out of jail, just to see if that would help her some. But they decided against that, and the doctor says to get her away from the scene of it all, to some place where she sees all new things and places and people, until she forgets all this going on here. So that's what they did, straight off. They sent her away. They got her quiet again, and they took her off to one of these here private schools for girls, and they had to do some shopping for one, because the first two they tried wouldn't have her on account of the scandal and all. Scandal? Said Ben, surprised. Why, sure, all them newspapers had it writ up like that little girl that got killed down in Inglewood, and Mr. Stewart's suin' one of 'em with a big lawsuit for sayin' some of the things they printed. He says they tried to make it 10 times as worse as it was, so they can sell more papers. Why, Miss Stewart is still thinkin' they might have to move right out of Pasadena in order to get rid of it all. It's the worst thing that's ever happened in their whole lives, and all on account of you. Where, said Ben, where did they take— I ain't tellin', declared Celia. It ain't no business of yours where she is. I'd cut my tongue out 'fore I'd tell ya. That's right, said Ben. I don't want to know. I don't need to know. I know where she really is. I know where she'll always be. Celia peered at him through the screen. They said they thought you was a little crazy, she nodded. You ever get fits? Well, thank you right kindly. Oh, this here. If you give this here box to Mr. Stewart some time, I'll be much obliged to you. Celia looked at it suspiciously. What's in it? It's his. No rats. No rats. Celia opened the screen door and accepted the box, and quickly closed the door again. Ben stepped away. He took one look at the playhouse, then without looking at Celia, he walked down the private road to Arroyo Drive. Celia hurried to the front of the house and watched him go. He passed along Palm Drive and was out of sight. One long block brought him to the end of the streetcar line. Funny, that day I should get on that car, and then all that starts to happen, he told himself. Well, it's all over now, unless maybe for her it's just the beginning of something. Probably so. Shouldn't be surprised. Just the beginning of something. South toward Colorado Street to find the Foothill Boulevard, east for Arizona. Sudbury Avenue, Maple Larchmont. That's where I got on. There it begun. Here it ends. No use feelin' sad. Everything ends sometime. Why, 'tain't every man who's knowed 2 great women in his life. One with good sense, one with pure sense. All gold, finer'n gold, finer'n pure gold.